So, welcome everybody. Katie has over 10 years experience working in HR and now passionately supports small businesses as a HR consultant in her own business, better known as HRKatie. After working years full time and doing the commute while struggling in a small family, she understands the benefits of flexible working from a parent's perspective. But her experience managing HR, she also knows why it's so important to get it right from the employer's point of view too. In this luncheon now, we're going to answer some of your HR questions about flexible working, not only from the perspective of a parent, but also from an employer too. This is based on the idea that flexibility needs to work both ways. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you very much for having me, Amy.
Yeah, so the idea for this live came about after something you said in our 5 Hour Club podcast, Jordan, that flexibility works both ways. And that really stuck with me, because often we look at flexibility as something that's just from the parents' point of view, something that they really want and what they need. But I think we also need to think about this from an employer's point of view as well. So before we jump into any of the nitty gritty questions, can you tell us what you mean by flexibility works both ways?
Yeah, so I think what I've seen as an HR person, but also as a parent myself and as someone who has worked flexibly, what I think people sometimes overlook is that the give and take has to happen on both sides. So it's for employers to be flexible, of course, but parents and carers need to kind of be aware of their flexibility as well. So if one side is an immovable object, it sort of doesn't really help the situation, because if the whole thing about flexibility is that there's two sides to flexibility. I mean, the irony is, and again, if anyone on this live is a working parent, they'll understand if they've put in a flexible working request. The kind of irony of a flexible working request is that it is not flexible. You ask for your, say, 40 hours a week or whatever to be reduced or flexed. But once it's in place, it's a permanent change to your terms and conditions. And again, as we know as parents and carers, like once your childcare arrangements are in place, those are very, very hard for you to flex. So it's about where there is flexibility on both sides, where is it possible to be flexible as an employer and an employee, but understanding the kind of boundaries. So that's kind of what I mean about it, that like obviously there's a perspective from each side.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Because I think it is ironic that parents are looking for the flexibility, but actually, what we mean is we need to create these boundaries within something that we can work within based on childcare needs or all of those things that, we have to work within our routine, and work has to form part of that. And an employer, we almost have to communicate with the employer what it is that we need in that space. And then that is what we need by flexibility, not that, we're going to be able to work here, there, and everywhere and work all hours under the sun, because then obviously that leads to burnout and, unsustainable working practices. I think you're
Exactly.
right. I think it's, although this term flexibility, it's sort of how do we communicate what that means on both sides of the coin. So that's why I really love your perspective on actually it does need to work for both perspective. So we're
Mm.
going to dig into some of those
Yeah.
HR questions now that employers and parents often have. I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
you have from your type of work as well. So let's start with flexibility then. So what does that really mean? And I think that's something that is often asked, especially since COVID, where I think flexibility often means that we just work from home. And
Mm.
from an employer's perspective, I can see that it can feel really scary and unknown, especially if they haven't had a parent or a team member wanting flexibility around the normal 9 to 5 before. So from an employer's point of view, so what simple adjustments can make the biggest difference for parents and carers in terms of flexibility?
So I think it's about being aware of things like core hours is a good example. So if you have the 9 to 5 is a construct, let's be honest. It was invented and we've all kind of stuck to it, but why? So sort of that's the first thing you kind of have to have in your mind. However, that is the way the world works. So I'm not saying that we can change it entirely, but it is that sort of thing of like, if you know that you've got certain members of your team that need to do the school run, it's virtually impossible for them to be at their desk by 9 a.m. because they don't drop off at school till 8:45 or whatever the time the drop off is. There is that thing of like, if you have a core hour that's sort of 9:30 to 3:30, so that people within that time have a little bit more of a boundary to be able to do the drop off but still be in and not be classed as late all the time. So that those are kind of quite that's quite a practical example, but it just kind of gives you some boundaries. And the other thing to think about as well with those core hours is things like sort of setting meetings within core hours, so that, again, if possible, and again, I work with clients and employers who have people in multiple time zones. So again, that's another kind of juggle when, if they're in the Middle East, they've already been in the office 5 hours by the time everyone's logging on. So it does add another layer of stress. But that thing of like, when I see a meeting go in my diary at 3 p.m, I'm like, no, I actually have changed my calendar settings now. So people physically cannot book appointments past 2:30 because the stress it put on me of knowing I had to then go back to them and say, actually, I've got to do the school run. I can't be there that day at that time, So it's those kind of small shifts of like, if you know that you can kind of, if there are core meetings that everyone needs to attend, try and get them sort of towards the middle of the day, because that's usually going to be the time that everyone is available. And then I suppose, again, from an employer's point of view, obviously, I think COVID and hybrid working has helped us move past this bums on seats mentality a little bit. But, I do also see the benefit of those in-person days, in-person working. I still like it myself. Don't get me wrong, I do work from home on my own quite a lot, but I have, I suppose, a different perspective to maybe some other self-employed people, that I do get to go into offices and I do get to go and work with people because of what I do. And, so if you're planning those in-person days, you're given plenty of notice, or, you have it as a fixed day, so that, as we said, you have constant childcare arrangements for, that Tuesday or that Wednesday, that's your all hands day, so that everybody kind of has the boundaries in advance. And then as a parent, from the parent side of like, if there aren't, things fall over, kids get sick, or, if you're a carer of an elderly parent, sometimes emergencies happen. So it's that thing of like just trying to communicate as early as possible, what the issues are, keep your responses tight, communicate as much as possible, basically, because at the end of the day, the main driver for everybody should just be that the work gets done and outputs are delivered, and that's what people should be judged on, not just, I sat at my desk for 8 hours a day.
Yeah, we often talk about that a lot at 5 Hour Club is, although we say 5 hour workday, because that helps create those core hours that you're talking about,
Yeah.
creates those boundaries around the working day that sort of fit within a school day. But
Mhm.
it's, about that communication, that if something, does break and something doesn't go to plan, then there's that
Mm.
flexibility around that. So then how can parents then build up that trust with their manager, that the flexibility that they're asking for, all those core hours that they're asking for, is going to, be adhered to, that they're going to do what they say they're going to do? What can a parent do side of things?
Well, I think, again, it kind of goes back to, as we said, like communicating clearly, setting like their expectations, but also showing that when you know that things are busy and you know that there's a lot of pressure on the team, that you try your best to sort of step in and help where possible. There might be days that you do have an after school club, so that, that can be a slightly longer day, or, it's just, I suppose it's kind of demonstrating that reliability and that, as I said, that sort of deliverable outcome, to show that it is, you are, you're still a valuable employee. Of course you are. Having a baby doesn't rot your brain. I mean, it's well sometimes, but only for a little while, and then you want to get back to real life again. So yeah, it's about sort of like helping to sort of show that you're reliable, because of course you're reliable, owning, that you're like, this is my work and I know I need to get it done and this is how I'm going to deal with it. So I suppose it's those solutions as well, of like, if there's an option to say, okay, I've got a clash with this, but could we do this instead? It's sort of on you to help manage the process as well. Don't just, well, I can't do that, because it just doesn't have that conversation, that flexibility conversation of like, well, I just can't do that, so that's the end of it. It just doesn't help employers understand a different way if you're being completely inflexible with them.
Well, this is it. You're right. It's inflexibility. If you're being inflexible, how can you expect your employer to be completely flexible and bend over backwards for you? But I do think parents are often so grateful if they do find an employer that is flexible, that understands their needs and does generally keep to those core hours and those meeting times and respects
Yeah.
their time and their responsibilities outside of work, then I think parents often give that back so much in strides when they're in work. And it's,
Exactly.
parents don't want to let go of these brilliantly flexible roles. So it is
Yeah.
about the responsibility on both sides, isn't it? Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it is just, yeah, within the rigidness that is needed sometimes, that flex around it, and just, doing what you say you're going to do, regardless of sort of how you're doing that generally, is, I think,
And I just think overall, like, transparency as well, right? Like, there's no smoke and mirrors of, like, you're pretending that you're not a parent. Like, do you know what I mean? It's that most people that you work with have kind of been through it or a version of it at other times. So it's most times it's not that they don't understand, but it's like if you can be transparent of like, this is the issue I'm having, how can we deal with it? That would be the kind of thing I would suggest. For example, as I said, sort of shifting meetings to kind of lunch times or those kind of things that like just help everybody see. Certain manager might think, well, the end of the day is a great time for me for a meeting because I've done all my work and I've got time to talk to people. Whereas like for a parent, the end of the day is the worst possible time to have a meeting. So it's just being open and honest of like, that just really doesn't work for me.
right. So that transparency builds trust. Like if you both know where you are
Yeah.
on both sides of the page, then you're going to build trust with, and understanding the needs of the other point of views. Getting as transparent as possible is key.
Exactly, because if you keep not going to that meeting because it doesn't work for you, but you don't say anything about it, again, it's like it builds the sort of the distrust because they're like, well, they just never bloody turn up, do they? And it's like that doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit the parent who's trying to juggle making dinner whilst telling their 11-year-old to do their homework, and it really doesn't help your employer who obviously is expecting results from you. So like it's like you said at the start, you end up feeling like you're kind of failing as a parent and failing as an employee, and it's totally like not what anybody wants.
And I think employers and employers' point of view, if they, can really nurture that parent, for whatever they're going through and build in that sort of transparency and trust there, it's likely they're going to stay long term because it's really hard to find that elsewhere. So let's move on to the next point then, which is around, so we talked about the broader sense of flexibility. Now let's
Yeah.
get into the hybrid and remote working, which often gets thought of as being flexibility. And
Yeah.
at the moment, obviously, it's full of a lot of contention, particularly with a lot of return to office mandates coming in,
Mm.
policies changing around hybrid working. We need to remember that, flexibility isn't just this hybrid remote working. It does give a parent, that great amount of flexibility of how much work they can get done within a working day when they have got other care and responsibility.
Yeah.
But it isn't always easy for an employer or a manager when maybe they've had a new policy come into place that is for the whole company. How do they then give a parent that sort of individual change of policy or, give that flexibility that they need if they can't come into the office 3 or 4 days a week now?
Mm.
So what can employers do to make this sort of hybrid working easier for parents?
So I would say the main thing is if there are changes coming down the line, give people as much notice as possible. So like one of the employees that I do a lot of work with, they have upped their in working days, but they gave people 6 months notice to be able to make sure that they were able to like adjust childcare arrangements if they needed to. And it's that predictability as well of the routines, because as we said, sort of like the irony of flexible working is it's not that flexible. So it's just like making sure that everybody kind of knows what the plan is. Again, I've already said it, but yeah, communication, transparency, like the reasons why the in-person days are so valuable. And then I suppose as well, it's about making sure that everybody's aware of the priorities so that there is a kind of a focus on when there is the in-office time, that it's used most valuably, that it is not just, I mean, don't get me wrong, it is also about building just general connections, and it is about that kind of like, coffee chat, etc. But it is also about having proper face-to-face time, with your team, with your manager, and just sort of making sure that the priorities are that when you're in the office that day, making sure that everybody knows like why they're there and what they're supposed to be there for. Yeah, I think those are probably the main things really. And I suppose, yeah, obviously, like, again, clear communication of like deadlines and just making sure that everybody's on the same page with
Yeah,
what
I
needs
mean,
to be delivered.
feel parents' frustration when they come and they say, okay, well, it's now 4 days in the office or 3 days in the office. I can't make this work financially, maybe on a train, and then I'm wasting 3 hours a day doing the commute. I'm having to
Mm,
after school clubs and all those extra additional costs that there are. When they go into the office, they're just sat and then maybe they don't speak to anybody all day. And
yeah.
it kind of, you can see why the frustration builds. Intentionality from an employer's point of view is really important, and not just saying, well, you have to be in the office because, well, we paid for this really expensive office and nobody's here. And but, that it can be really frustrating. So what can parents do maybe on their side to make it be successful? How can they, find a way for it to work for them if they do have to be in?
So I mean, part of this, to be bluntly honest, I mean, I am old, so I do remember when I had to be in the office every day, and I had to do that like 8 a.m. drop off at nursery, and they didn't get picked up till 6, and it was the mad dash for the trains, and I was doing that every single day. So I have done that, and I remember, and I'm not saying it's great. I'm not saying that we should go back
The
to
great-
that. But, it's funny because I work with people now who have only had children since COVID, and I'm kind of like, "You have no idea what it was like." So, I'm not saying that, like, we definitely have to go back to that, but, like, yeah, the world did exist beforehand, and we did do it. It wasn't great, but we did have to do it. So, unfortunately, you are slightly fighting that battle with the people that, were like, "Well, we all did it, like, we all made it work." And again, I don't wanna get into a debate about that necessarily, but what I was gonna say is that there are, again, this idea of, like, I've spoken to parents that are like, "Well, I can't be in the office that day because I've got to do the nursery pickup." But it's like, you can do both. It's a little bit of a mind shift about sort of timings and availability. So again, it goes back to having those conversations around, this is really difficult for me because of XYZ. And then it also goes back to that thing I was saying about like making sure that those in-person days are valuable. Because, I've seen exactly the same things that people are like, I come into the office and then I spend the whole day on Teams or Zoom or whatever because everyone else is at home. So it's about making sure that those in-person days are coordinated and valuable so that when people are in, they see the value and they can feel the connection with people and they can feel that they're kind of making the use of that time and getting things done quicker because you're not just pinging messages backwards and forwards. You actually can go over and be like, actually, how do I deal with this? And then it's all done. And it's that collaboration side of things that is the main benefit of being in person with people. So yeah, it's sort of all of the things that I've said already around like communication, transparency, but just, yeah, the organization of not just you, but kind of those around you as well, because, it's all very well and good that like, well, Tuesday's the only day I can be in the office. If no one else is going to be in the office on a Tuesday, it's really low value. Whereas like if Tuesday is an in-person day for everybody, you're going to get so much more value out of that day. So it's a little bit of kind of, as I said, flexibility both sides, give and take, like working out what kind of everybody can pull together and work together better.
Yeah, it is hard, isn't it? So what would you do then if you're realizing that actually the only day you can go in is a Tuesday and nobody else is going in? Like, who do you go to? Do you go to your team leader? Do you go to HR about this? Like, where is the wiggle room? Well, what should a parent do in that situation?
I mean, I would always say go to your line manager first because they are your kind of day-to-day person to help with things. HR also, if they're decent, should also help, kind of come up with ideas for kind of restructuring or reorganizing. But then, yeah, I suppose, like as I said, worst case scenario, it might be that you do need to think about adjusting after school club days or, saying, okay, well, I can't get them into after school club on a Thursday until January. So can we do this for now, but then we'll swap it? Do you know what I mean? It's like, again, it's sort of, it doesn't work right now, but we can look at solutions for the sort of longer terms. There's just an openness, as I said, and just sort of a willingness on both sides to kind of try and find a solution.
I think that's the difference, isn't it? I think it's that willingness to be like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't work for me right now. But as we know, things change, children change, everything
Yeah, yeah,
changes
yeah.
very quickly, work changes. So it's about what can we do? Maybe not now, but in the future. I really like that. I think that is helpful because maybe it's reassuring that this is not going to be insufferable forever. It's going to just be a short period of time. I have to
No,
try and bear it until the after school club opens up and I can get them in there. I can change that. That keeps work happy, and then you get that collaboration that you need from a hybrid working day.
and just think as well, like, well, I mean, we say it about parenting, but like what is it they say, that the days are long but the years are short? These are all seasons. There's only a sort of a relatively fixed period when you've got really little children in nursery and you've got all the kind of nursery stuff to deal with. Then this other period where they're in primary school and they're still kind of a bit more, but then you get to another bit where they are taking the bus to school and they are able to kind of be a bit more independent and stuff. So again, it's like it's quite short, relatively speaking, in someone's lifespan, the amount of time that they're going to need like this high level of flexibility. So it's like, if you're willing to invest in someone for a couple of years to kind of get them over, this season, bump. No, but this parenting season or this caring season, that they know that they have these extra responsibilities for a while, but it won't always look the same. And I think that's the other thing to say, that like, I'm not talking about it changing in like 3 months' time. And sometimes there might be those short-term bumps you've got to get over. But it's also that thing of, the longer term of like, if you've invested in someone and you believe in their work, they can deliver. So how can we make that work again? It just might look a bit different.
It's like riding the storm almost, isn't it? You're going to ride this
Yeah,
wave with them together.
yeah, yeah,
So talking of changes, Emma, so we've talked about that seasonality to parents' careers after children. What
yeah.
happens when, circumstances do change? Maybe, they go on maternity leave or they're coming back from maternity leave, or they go into a role where they need more flexibility, or maybe they're given a promotion, they step into a more senior role and they take
Mm,
on more responsibility, yet they still want to work part-time hours. It
mm.
can be quite hard, I imagine, for on a manager's point of view to know how to manage those changes and act transition and best support their employees that they are, going to stay for the longer term. What, how can employees, parents' point of view, communicate when they do need those sort of changes to change for their hours and other needs?
Yeah, I mean, communicate early is the key thing, I would say. Like, as soon as you kind of know a change is coming or feel that there might need to be a change coming, is like to start having those conversations as soon as possible. Because again, now, I mean, that's a classic HR thing that like, people wait 3 months and then it's a human bin fire and you're like, could you not have told me before it completely exploded? So, it's like, don't wait till you get to crisis point with your childcare or your caring responsibilities before you speak up. Like, the earlier you can say, I'm really struggling, or I don't think this is working particularly well for me, the longer the runway to try and deal with it. And I think as well about just, again, I suppose it goes back to sort of expectations and deliverables of like, if you can kind of agree clear goals or targets or, updates, like a kind of, like if you have, like I say, a daily handover process or whatever is required to kind of keep things moving. It's just working out like what that looks like for you and your team and your manager. Because as I said, for what works in a sales role might be completely different in a customer support role. So it's just thinking about like how it works in your role, in your business, in your team as well. Because again, it might be that like if you're working with a bunch of people who are all mums of small children, they all kind of want the same thing anyway. But, if you're working in a team where you've got, say, loads of graduates who have literally nothing else to do, it's just, it's very different expectations. So you can't really expect Gen Z to completely understand that you actually want to be home for dinner. And that is actually like what you actually want, is to be at home with your family. Like, nobody's a mind reader. You've got to kind of make it clear on all sides. And as I said, from the employer as well, it's like the more they know, the better in a way, because like it just helps with all those kind of measurable outcomes and performance goals. Because obviously there's always going to be things that come up with short timelines and very kind of urgent, this has got to get done. But if you can sort of mitigate those as much as possible, or you can kind of show that when there is something like that, you can find a bit of extra support and be able to step up, but then know that you'll get that kind of flexibility to then step away again if for a little bit. It's that sort of almost like consultative. Do you know what I mean? Kind of approach of um dealing
Jumping in
with.
when there's a fire and, get
Yeah,
get
exactly.
your hands dirty when you have to, but then, no, actually, this is not, my role,
This
position.
isn't forever. Exactly. Yeah, it won't always look like this. Yeah.
So from an employee's point of view, say that, there's a manager, they haven't had children, they don't really get why they need that flexibility, but then they have, a really strong person who has got great experience, been working in the organization for years, but wants to work part-time, but still wants to progress. How can an employer help that parent continue to progress, even if they are doing reduced hours, they are doing part-time for a moment? What can an employer do to help them and support them in that way?
Well, again, I think it's this whole thing about managing the outcomes and the expectations, because it's like if you have there's no reason you can't progress, because if you've got the clear goals of where you need to go, if they can be managed within the, say, reduced hours or reduced days, it's just about everybody knowing how it's going to be managed and how it's going to be planned out. It's kind of a planning process. I'm not saying it would happen at the snap of a fingers. It might take a bit of organizing. And again, we've talked a lot about flexible working, hybrid working, but again, there's other options of like, say compressed hours. So, that you still do the 40 hours, but you do 4 really long days and then you have a day off, so that, you're still getting that time. It just is handled slightly differently. So again, it's just sort of thinking slightly differently about what it might look like. Or for, your example, the 5-hour workday, of like how you can ensure that those 5 hours are really spent solidly, really quality, and that there's no sort of like meetings for the sake of meetings, or any kind of non-essential work is redistributed potentially. So it's just sort of different ways of kind of thinking about things, and just looking at where is there absolutely an immovable force, or immovable object, I should say, and where do we have the flexibility to make certain things slightly easier to manage.
I think for managers to sort of reframe, somebody who's working part time, they're not part dedicated, they're not part ambitious, they're there and actually they're probably really efficient during the time that they do have without their children, or, short amount of time. Now, for me, I work a 5-hour workday. It is very intense during that
Yeah.
time. And I do that, I'm building the business in that way. And it's intense, but I get the work done that I need to get done. So it's being realistic with, what your KPIs are, what your outcome is within that time, and knowing that actually that person's probably they're bringing their years of experience with them. They're going to be able to hit the ground running usually, it's given that chance. And maybe, in a few months' time, reflect and think, is it working? Is there something that needs to be dropped? Other things that actually need to be
Mm,
shared across the team who maybe do have more time. And
mm,
like you say, with the core hours and core meeting, making sure that you're just being as efficient as possible and not overlooking them. Because I think there's this whole thing around, being in the office, you're sort of scared into going into the office because if you're not there, then maybe you'll get overlooked for opportunities that come up. There's whole proximity bias. We talk about somebody's right there, you're going to see them, you're going to give them a promotion, all of those things, but not overlooking the people who are working diligently from their kitchen table out of the office and getting their work done very quietly in the background, making sure that you're recognizing them as well. I guess it's something that needs to be thought about.
yeah, and I think that does have to be a conscious decision, because like, let's not beat around the bush. Like, that proximity bias is real. Is a visibility issue, because they are the front of your mind. They are the person that you can just go and like tap on the shoulder and talk to. So, there is a lot to be said for that, and it is going to be hard. That is the hard part about the hybrid in particular, that you do end up in this, sometimes in this slightly middle ground of like, you only ever see people on Zoom. So yeah, I'm not there's no easy solutions for it. I'm afraid I don't have a magic formula. If I did, that'd be good, wouldn't it?
It would be good. Okay, I feel like you are a source of knowledge in this area. Like, I know that you're very busy when COVID hit in terms of helping people manage this sort of period of change where we're not just bums and seats in the same place, for 40 hours.
No,
So
no,
it is
exactly.
being sort of
And I
redesigning.
mean, That's the thing. I think, we're 5 years in now, so we've kind of seen the pros and cons a lot more. So, like, we know there are pros. Of course, there are pros of working from home and having that added, or I suppose, less commute and less cost, etc. But, the flip side is that, again, I've worked with companies that've got real data that show, they have had an output drop, they have had a productivity drop, the margins have reduced because time taken to deliver projects has taken longer because people aren't there in person to collaborate more. So, it's not to say that it is just a bums on seat mentality. Like, the drive to try and get the in-person working more effective is really driven by quite hard data and facts that people do actually work better together.
You're not meant to say that, Katie.
No, I'm not meant to say
You have
that, but,
to
like,
look at data, but I think it's that thing, isn't it? I think you've got this overarching generally for the output of the company, and if it's sales
yeah,
led, actually the sales team work better when they're in an office. But maybe for those admin support staff who need days or they just need to get on and not be distracted, maybe they don't need to be in the office and look at
yeah.
this. Yes, you need this sort of business sense on what makes sense for the business generally, but also looking on an individual sense, or actually, does it make sense for that person? Are we going to be able to get the most out of that person by them coming into the office all of the time, or and just looking at their role and their unique situation, which is
And
hard.
that's
It does make it hard.
it does make it hard, but again, that's why I truly believe that, like, hybrid, when it's done well, is the answer, because you do kind of get the best of both. You do. Like, I really believe it. And as I said, I'm saying that as someone that, like a lot of small business owners I know never get to do what I do, which is go and sit in an office and talk to people. And let me tell you guys, it's quite nice,
Yeah.
honest.
No, I quite like it every now and again. I was very quite jealous of my, husband going into the office. I thought he gets an £18 Deliveroo account every lunch. They'll quite fancy that instead of having,
That's very fancy. I was going to say
warmed
you
up
get
leftovers
hot
again.
coffee. My expectations are much lower than that, Amy. Hot coffee in peace is where I was going, but yeah.
Yeah, not surrounded by your mess. I get that right. We digress. I do have a question, Katie, from our employer community, and they've written this
Okay.
charity organisation, and they've
Yeah.
asked about job sharing. So
Yeah.
he said, we know that job sharing can be a great way for parents to maintain their senior level positions by
Yeah.
sharing responsibilities with another member of the team. But is
Yeah.
it still a popular policy? What are the main positives, negatives, and how does this work for senior level positions? Is there handover? Does it, is communication longer? All of those things. So,
Yeah.
job sharing from an HR point of view, how does it work?
I mean, I'll be honest, it's a tricky one because, yeah, not a lot of businesses do it at a very senior level. So, like, I don't have massive amounts of data on this. However, I have worked with an organization where they did have the CEO as a job share. And the way they worked that was that they had that each CEO or joint CEO did 3 days. So they had a Monday, Tuesday, they both were in on a Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday. So the Wednesday were the handover days, were there any like joint decision days, but effectively Monday, Tuesday, autonomous CEO, Thursday, Friday, autonomous CEO. So I think it's about having very clear boundaries, very clear like escalation points, decision making strategies. I was
Right.
trying a word, sorry, perimenopause. And just like having these sort of, again, it's sort of the irony of the like flexibility not being very flexible, but having like very clear guidelines and ownership of like who does what. Again, I would imagine there are some circumstances because emergencies happen. So, like, there will be some circumstances where it might be that the Monday person has to make a decision without being able to speak to the joint. And they just, they kind of know that that's the decision that had to be made at the time, and that's what has to be dealt with going forward. So again, it's about just making sure that there's this like clarity of communication around like why decisions were made, how they were made, and just try and make it as predictable as possible.
Yeah, we actually really advocate for job sharing at 5 Hour Club because we
Okay.
see that it really gives some people who are senior level positions that opportunity to work reduced hours, but
Yeah.
still maintain their authority and their position and that, continue up the career ladder. So we see it work. We've seen it multiple times where it has worked really well.
Mhm.
And we work closely with the Job Share Revolution, who really advocate for this and, can do some work sort of in-house with you to support this. But we see, like you said, it's if you do it well, you've got this handover day in the middle, you've got two heads for the price of one. And often if you get the
Yeah.
right pairing, they've got quite different skill sets, yet they're covering this broad range of senior level responsibilities. So you get
Yeah.
so much more for your money. And although there were questions around financial implications, we did some sort of digging into this and we found that actually it reduces some of the employer national insurance contribution,
Oh, re
pensions, depending on your salary band,
Yeah.
either makes a slight reduction or no difference at all. And then benefits wise, are you making the impact that way? Admin wise, okay, you might need, another laptop or that kind of thing. But financially, it doesn't make as much difference if you think of the recruitment cost of then going to hire another, full-time person. You
Mm.
potentially are keeping two people, maybe having babies at the same time in those senior level positions to then come back, work part-time hours, have that crossover, have that handover. One thing that was questioned around, well, how do people in their team think about this? And one
Mm.
example we've seen, and actually they're from Beerstoff, which is this beer brand, and in Germany, they really advocate for job share positions. And I think
Okay.
they're one of the highest, percentage of job shares for senior level roles over there. And they're trying to do that in the UK as well. And we spoke to the marketing team there that have started that. And in terms of their team members, one week they might have meetings with one particular group of team members who are working full time, and then they'll switch over. So they're getting exposure to both
Yeah.
people, both experiences. So it's really valuable, this breadth and depth of information you're getting from this essentially one hire. You've got two people and it's just about finding that right pairing.
Yeah.
And, there are lots of ways going about it. Either you go and find the pairing yourself or
Mm.
we've posted roles for job share opportunities on 5 Hour Careers. So they are out there. It's just finding them. But we see
Yeah.
that benefits of it completely outweigh the negative from both an employer's point of view, but also from the employee's point of view. You think, well, they're still getting their, they're doing their 3 days, they're getting their 2 days off essentially, and they're still maintaining that level that
Yeah.
they had when they left. So benefits me in terms of job sharing work really well. It's not known, but it's a shame really. So again, it's about being creative with the people you've got in your team, with the constructs within your organisation about how you can make this work for everybody, both as a parent, but also then, yeah, from the employer's point of view.
And again, it goes back to something we've said the whole way through this around clarity, communication, transparency. It's just about making sure that everybody knows where they are. But then you still have, two heads, which sometimes people say is better than one. So,
Mm.
it's it's the same thing about employing parents, I suppose, of like, as you said, what can be condensed into 5 hours because of the knowledge and the depth of their experience if you are a more senior level person when you go and have children. What can be achieved in 5 hours is the same that a more junior person would take 7 or 8 hours to do, because it's just about not having to go through that whole learning process. It just gets delivered.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, isn't it? I think it is about valuing parents' experience that they often bring into a role, whether it's a new role or they've been with you before. It's about thinking, okay, what can we do to support them on that side? Because pretty sure that they're going to give it back, you know, in heat
Yeah,
on the other side.
yeah.
So thank you very much, Katie. So I really appreciate all of your thoughts and perspective on this. It has been really interesting to look at why flexibility does need to work both ways. It is that give or take. And I think you've answered a lot of questions that a lot of our employers have, particularly around this. I know parents want it, maybe employers are sometimes scared of it, but hopefully less so. But if employers do have questions or HR questions, where can they find you, Katie, to ask some more?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Katie Elliott, 2 L's, 2 T's, but I also am HRKatie, and I'm also on Instagram, hr.katie.
Fabulous.
Or you can find my website, hrkatie.co.
Go and hit her up. She's got a great HR hub with lots of resources and things that will really help you if you are a small business. So thank you for your time today. We will leave it
Thanks
there.
for
And if
having
you do
me.
have any other questions, put them in the comments and we can continue to answer them there for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, definitely. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks so much, Katie. Take care. Bye.